You are now tuned in to Go Time Dolphins with Charlie Touche and Kadeem Simmons, the Miami Dolphins podcast that's for the fans and by the fans.
Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's show time. Going all out when it's go time. Go. I ain't wasting no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's show time. Cause it's your time. Lay it on the line when it's go time. Go. Don't waste no time.
Welcome all. This is a strange one. It's my big face, no Charlie Touche. But it's not a solo episode. I do have guests. Mr. Charlie Touche will be returning soon. He's just traveling and the way schedules and all that kind of stuff. I know you're listening, Charlie. So again, happy birthday for the other day. Shout out to the voice of the podcast, Jordan Simmons, as well. It was her birthday recently, so quite a few birthdays in February. It's a busy month. Shout out to friend of the podcast, Mars Gaskin, whose birthday was on the 15th. So yeah, Go Time Dolphins, February birthdays leaves us very short out of the pocket. But I won't talk too long by myself because I hate the sound of my own voice, and I have two amazing guests with me. So I'll do the intro. I won't mess up the intro, and then I'll bring in the guests. So let me get this right first time, and first time only. It's Go Time Dolphins, the Miami Dolphins podcast that goes not only across the pond, but across the world. I'm your co-host, Kadeem Simmons. As you can see, there is no Charlie Touche with me. It's not only by the fans, it's for the fans. Did I just mess that up? Not only for the fans, but by the fans. By the fans. Regardless, Charlie will be in the comments. He'll let me know in the next episode. How'd you mess it up? It's been 3 years. All that kind of stuff. Charlie, I know. But like I said, I am not alone today. I can't even call them special guests anymore because they're way past special guests. And they're not even like returning cast members. It's like that awkward, not even awkward, it's that like returning cast members / like regular cast members, but everyone knows who they are. It is the wonderful Kaska brothers, Josh and Aaron from the same Old Dolphins shows. Starting with you, Josh. How are you?
I'm great. I'm glad to be on everybody's favorite podcast.
I knew I missed something. Oh my. This is why Charlie can't leave me by myself. I'm so annoyed.
It's all good, man. I got you.
He gave me like, Kadeem, how do you thanks for that. Thank you. Aaron, how are you?
I'm good, and I really feel for you because I've been in this position that you're in, where Josh is usually the one that starts the show. He kind of drives the show, and then he's not there, and you're just kind of like, all right, well, here goes nothing, and you just try to wing it, and it's harder than it looks, or harder than it sounds, we should say.
Yeah, like I do think I should have my own intro, but like I never use it, so what's the point? And it's like the one episode a year when Charlie can't make it, but no, I need to have it like written by the side somewhere, or I guess in front of me, so I don't look like I'm looking to the side. But no, before we truly delve into the topic of today, just a few, I guess, to get things out of the way. As mentioned on the last podcast, the new league season will coincide with the first ever Go Time Dolphins live show. So if you haven't already, subscribe to Go Time Dolphin, turn on notifications. We've been pondering whether to go live, whether to not go live. Same old Dolphins are live 24/7. It's brilliant. You're there, you're interacting. Me and Charlie kind of do the interacting after, but we're like, no. New season, new venture, let's go live. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I will do this at the end as well, but do it at the start. Josh, tell everyone where they can find your wonderful, wonderful podcast.
Oh, well, you can download, rate, and subscribe to the Same Old Dolphin Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, anywhere that you can get your podcast. You can also get every episode of the Same Old Dolphins Show at dolphinstalk.com and on the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. So we invite everybody to hop on. It's a little bit slower going right now because it's the off season. And unlike Go Time Dolphins, who is, always going, it's always go time. We take a little break at this time of year. So our episodes are a little bit more sporadic at the moment, but that's a place where you can find us. You can also subscribe to the Dolphins Talk, dolphinstalk.com daily podcast feed, and every episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show is available there as well. So if you're looking for us, now you know where to find us.
Brilliant. And I can only imagine that given how many times we've crossed, paths on different shows and stuff like that, if you're not already subscribed to, Same Old Dolphins, I don't know where you've been. It's community over here, so go definitely do that. In terms of news, I guess, Wednesday afternoon for myself in the UK, but if you're in the US, it was kind of, I guess, more morning, midday-ish. The Dolphins announced what was probably not just the worst kept secret, but the longest kept information that it got to the point where Dolphins fans once again was like, is this really going to happen? And that information was Vic Fangio. The Miami Dolphins have a new defensive coordinator. I think it's fair to say he was at the start of the search on top of everyone or most people's list. As the search continued, and it was like he was, I guess, looking around to see if he would join Denver or go elsewhere. Some Miami fans were like, nope, if you don't want to come, then we don't want you. We'll find someone else. Aaron, now that the news has been, officially confirmed, what are your thoughts on Vic Fangio to Miami as a new DC?
Yeah, it got tense there for a little bit. It got tense there after the first announcement, and then everybody was waiting. Okay, the Super Bowl's over. Monday, Tuesday. When is this going to happen? And finally today, it's official now. So we can take a sigh of relief. Dolphin fans need to chill out. This is so ridiculous. Like, we are so jaded and scorned right now that such a huge section of our fan base, the very idea that this gets announced a few weeks ago, and then all of a sudden there's a couple of days and we're like, well, is it official? He's saying that he's not coming. And then you have these Dolphin fans that are like, oh, screw him, we don't need him, he's flirting with the other guy. Come on, Dolphin. Those are the same Dolphin fans right now that are rejoicing because they're just like, thank God we got our guy. So stop with the false bravado. We needed a legitimate, experienced defensive coordinator. We got one of the best defensive minds in the league over the past 2-3 decades. So this is a good time to be a Miami Dolphin fan. With all the positivity that we have to build on, you couldn't have gotten a better defensive coordinator for this team. And so this team's trying to get to that next echelon, that next level. They're trying to break through. This is a hell of a start.
Josh, yeah, I guess same question to you, but also, where was your panic meter, like just before the Super Bowl and after, in terms of is he actually coming or not?
I mean, I don't know that I was ever like super worried, because I felt like even if they didn't get Fangio, even though it would have ended up being a super same old Dolphin situation, if the news had broken that he was coming, and then it ended up that he wasn't coming and they ended up not getting their guy, they were still likely to end up with a very solid defensive coordinator, whether it was Desai or somebody else that they were interested in. They were still going to be taking a step forward in terms of having a defensive coordinator. So I wasn't really ever like in a panic per se, but I was kind of sitting back and just kind of observing like the pure, like, it's so funny with the Dolphins and the Dolphins fan base, as the brain says, Dolphins fan base needs to chill out. But it's so funny how it seems like we constantly find ourselves where every single person's narrative is being met in some way, is being fed with just enough information. Like if you were a person that believes that the Dolphins front office is a mess and can never do anything right, the scenario was playing out where, the Dolphins have leaked the news that they've got Vic Fangio because they're trying to box him in. And now he's saying, I don't know. And maybe they pissed him off. And so he's going to go he's going to go work somewhere else. But if you're the eternal optimist Dolphin fan, you've got Vic Fangio, he's coming, and, everything's going to be fine. Or maybe you're the Dolphins fan who is kind of just waiting for the wheels to fall off, but hoping for the best. Everything was there for you, the same way. So it's just funny how the Dolphins seem to always find themselves in that same scenario where there are like 18 different reactions going on that are all valid in their own way.
Apologies, keep going. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, so I wasn't ever really panicked. I'm glad for a number of reasons that Fangio was the guy that the Dolphins ended up with, because he is a veteran leader, a former NFL head coach, a guy who is going to bring a maturity and a quality of having another adult in the room, which I think is very important, particularly when you've got a young, inexperienced head coach. I think that's good to have for a number of reasons, and not just the fact that he's going to be holding everybody on the defensive side of the ball accountable, but he's somebody that I think is just going to be good to have in the room, just all around. And on top of that, I mean, it says something about Mike McDaniel that he's able, as a young head coach, to bring in a veteran defensive coordinator for like Vic Fangio to join his staff. I think it's another big vote of confidence for Coach McDaniel. So I think it's really great in that respect as well.
It was such a, I guess, weird situation in which Josh Boyer got fired, and a few names kind of got leaked out there. The Dolphins were looking at this guy. But once, and I can't remember the person who initially broke the news, but was like, the Dolphins are going with Vic Fangio. I feel like a lot of people impatiently were like, okay, well, do it right now then. And people were like, well, no, he's still kind of working with the Eagles, but like he's joining Miami. He's given his word to Miami. Stephen Ross is making him the highest paid coordinator in the league. So he's got the financial incentive to join. It didn't need to happen, or didn't need to be announced immediately, because we've still got months until the season starts, months until, anyone comes back into the building. So yeah, for myself and others, it was more a case of, okay, we have tweets and episodes to do, so can you just announce it so we can kind of get that ball rolling? But outside of that, he was going to join, and I think that there was no news that there was a U-turn. Obviously, there was the quotes from himself allegedly, which was like, okay, I'm not, or I haven't signed with the Dolphins yet, but it doesn't mean he wasn't joining. It's just I haven't signed anything yet, so I'm focusing on the job right now. Let me do that job. And then once I do that job, and listen, if he wanted to take 2 weeks to gather his thoughts after the Eagles loss, give him 2 weeks. Why does it matter when he signed? So listen, it was a very, very odd, I say it was odd. Dolphins fans, there's no patience no more. Everything has to be now. Aaron, what do you think we can expect from Vic Fangio? And I say that from a point of view of, the Dolphins clearly have talent in the building when healthy. But what we saw in 2022 was that once a few key players on the defensive side of the ball were injured, that scheme, that zero blitz scheme just kind of fell apart. So, for any Dolphins fans who is completely unaware of what Vic Fangio can bring to the Dolphins, what can he bring?
So philosophically, you can't get, more antithetical to what the Dolphins did defensively the last couple of years with Brian Flores and Josh Boyer to what they're going to be under Vic Fangio. So the last couple of years, obviously, we all know the Dolphins have been a defense that's been predicated on bringing extra rushers and playing man coverage on the outside and forcing the quarterback to get rid of the ball quicker. And hopefully that, the press man coverage on the outside throws off the timing of the routes. The pressure forces some, a quick decision and forces turnovers. And, for the most part, for a couple of years there, it worked. And then, the secondary got blown to smithereens and they still tried to run the same defense. And we all saw how that turned out. And that's why Josh Boyer got fired. Well, now they're going to bring in a scheme that is different in 3 key ways. First and foremost, Vic Fangio's defenses blitz a lot more sparingly. Routinely, they're towards the bottom of the league in number of quarterback dropbacks where they're going to bring an extra rusher. So it is mostly predicated on bringing 4, getting pressure with those 4, and dropping 7 guys into coverage. It's also going to be mostly a zone concept. You're going to have some man coverage here and there because no NFL defense is just a one size fits all. You do this every single play, because if you did that every single play, no matter what scheme it is, opposing offenses are going to figure it out and they're going to pick you apart. So, but by and large, you're going to see a lot of, two high safety looks. You're going to see sometimes 3 guys over the top. Sometimes you're going to see, cornerbacks playing the bail technique and they drop deep and you have one guy in center field, and you're going to see them disguising a lot with that coverage. But the main thing is it's going to be zone defense. It's going to be zone coverage. And so you're not going to be asking Xavier Howard to lock down the team's the opposing team's best wide receiver and just go man for man without somebody over the top to help him out. Like no defensive back in the NFL it can really do that on a consistent basis, let alone somebody who's getting up into his 30s and has had a history of knee injuries, and this year had his groin injuries. So I think from a coverage aspect, I'm most excited to see the development of what Xavier Howard looks like in this defense, because what this defense really allows a player like Xavier Howard to do is rely on his football instincts and his ball skills. And we all know from watching Xavier Howard through his entire career that is what he excels at. He's great at reading the quarterback, reading the receiver's route, reading the receiver's eyes, and then making the play at the ball. He's arguably the best ball hawking defensive back or defensive player in the entire league in his generation at this point. I don't know what the number is, but it's some insane number of interceptions that he has over the amount of games that he's played. That is by far the most since he's been in the league. So I'm excited to see that. And then the other piece of the puzzle is I talked about rushing, getting pressure with 4. Well, a lot of people have bemoaned, especially this year, because everybody was looking for like the big sack numbers from Jalen Phillips. And, they made the trade for Bradley Chubb. They brought in Melvin Ingram to, everybody was looking for like big sack totals from those guys. But what they failed to realize is that in the Dolphins' previous scheme, while, they were rushing 4 a lot of times, they were playing gap control defense a lot of times. They really weren't telling their defensive linemen to just pin their ears back and go after the quarterback. Well, in this system, that's what they're going to be told to do. So I'm really excited to see the continued development, particularly of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, but also of Christian Wilkins, because you saw what the Eagles did. I think they had 70 sacks this year, and they did it in spite of not really blitzing very much. The Dolphins have the talent to do that. They probably could use an extra edge rusher or an extra, depth piece on the interior of the defensive line, but the Dolphins have the capability with the players that they have at their disposal to be a defense that's in the top 10 in the league in sacks, top 5 in the league in sacks, even lead the league in sacks without blitzing. And the ability to do that and then rely on the talent that we have in our secondary, bring in another piece or two. It's exciting. I think you're really going to see the full potential of this defense. And the other part of it is, more than anything else, aside from just being an adult in the room, which I think is such a dig at Mike McDaniel, because it sounds like they're hiring a child to be the defensive coordinator. But, like, they not only is Vic Fangio an adult, but he has credibility. Every man in that locker room, nobody's going to question what we're doing. None of the writers are going to question it. None of the coaches are going to question it. You always want your entire team to be pulling in the same direction. Vic Fangio is going to have the entire defense's attention, and he's going to have everybody rowing in the same direction.
Quite a few names there. Obviously Xavier Howard, Christian Wilkins, Jalen Phillips, and Bradley Chubb, who spent time with Fangio in Denver. One player who took a leap in his second year, could probably take an even bigger leap in his third year, is friend of the podcast, Javon Holland. You mentioned having, 2 safeties in the scheme. Josh, just how important are those safeties, and how big a year can we expect from not just friend of the podcast, Javon Holland, but friend of the podcast, Brandon Jones, once he returns from injury as well?
Oh, I mean, obviously it's vital. It's vital to it because, I mean, when you're bringing 4 and you're not relying on those cornerbacks to do everything themselves, it's important to have that help at safety, which is why I've got my eye on a free agent who may or may not have just been in the Super Bowl, but that's neither here nor there. It's going to be really important. But obviously, Brandon Jones coming back from injury, he's going to play. He's going to probably have a role to play in that. It's interesting because Brandon Jones was one of those guys that was really good at that safety blitz, and he was able to really come up and step up and bring pressure. And that's not something that he's going to be called upon to do very much. Or as often in this Fangio scheme. So it'll be important for him to be able to take a big step as that, kind of patrolling safety for the Dolphins this year. So that's something that I'm looking forward to as well. I mean, and Javon Holland, if he can continue to grow at the rate that, take another leap forward in year 3, the way that he did in year 2, I mean, we're really talking about not just, the ceiling just being off the charts, but you love to have players playing at that level, particularly when they're on a rookie contract, the way that Javon Holland is right now. That is a key component in building a team that can be a competitor, is having a lot of guys on the team who are playing at a super high level that you're not paying like they're playing at a super high level. And that's a huge thing. So you want him to take that next step forward. You want to see Jalen Phillips take that next step forward so that, you've got these guys performing at a high level that that aren't being paid so much, as opposed to guys like Emmanuel Ogbah, who is getting paid a lot of money, but is not playing like it. When the brain was saying again, a little bit ago, how the Dolphins could use another piece on the defensive line playing at a high level, I was like, yeah, they could certainly use Emmanuel Ogbah playing like the Emmanuel Ogbah that earned that big contract, as opposed to the Emmanuel Ogbah who, as we've seen him since the contract was signed. So that's kind of how I feel. I mean, I love how Javon Holland has played and has been such a great piece, such a great addition to the secondary. I mean, particularly with all of the injuries that we were dealing with this past season, his play in the secondary was really, really big. And I think if he can continue to grow like that, I mean, it's only going to serve to help the Dolphins have the big kind of bounce back year that they need to have in 2023 from that defense. If they're going to, let's face it, at this point, the Dolphins need to be Super Bowl contenders, right? Like, let's call it spade a spade. The Dolphins need to be Super Bowl contenders. If they're going to be Super Bowl contenders, a big part of that is that Javon Holland is going to continue to grow and become an elite safety in the NFL.
You mentioned someone who just played in the Super Bowl and he is a free agent. Is it someone who shares the same name with I guess one of the most famous GTA characters from San Andreas, I believe it was? Please tell me you played GTA at some point.
Dude, you might as well be speaking Chinese to me right now. I've got no idea what you're talking about.
GTA San Andreas, the main character was called CJ.
Yeah. Then the answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yay. So very quickly,
I get your video game reference.
very quickly then, why is CJ Gardner someone who you think could add to this defense? I know free agency is still a way away, but you're here, you've mentioned it, so let's talk. Plus, it helps with the next topic, kind of. So,
well, I mean, he's that physical, speedy, over the top safety that I think is just going to add to that ability, that rangy kind of safety that can get a lot done. I mean, and I think is a perfect fit. I think he might be the only issue is that he may be a little bit more expensive than I think what the Dolphins might be willing to spend, but I think that is an area where if they can figure it out, because there's all kinds of, not to get into the whole free agency conversation and about where the Dolphins need to prioritize spending money, but I think he's a guy, I think he's basically the top of the position right now when it comes to free agents. And I just think he's a guy that would fit into this defense very, very well. Brain, would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I
sorry,
think
Kadeem, I don't mean to strip the hosting duties away from you. I'm so used to tossing it over to the brain.
Feel free. Again, I messed up the intro, so at that point, I have no host, powers on this episode. So at that point, it's just three dudes chatting, and feel free to bounce it around however you want.
I think that he could certainly be something that the Dolphins are going to look at. But as funny as it is, because we've spent the first half of the show talking about Vic Fangio and the Dolphins defense and about how the defense is going to be better positioned. I think when you look at the Super Bowl and you look at the Eagles, one of the best defensive teams in the league, and they ultimately lost the game because at the end of the day, they couldn't stop Patrick Mahomes, because the way the rules are in this league, and it has been for about, 10, 15 years now. It used to be defense wins championships, but now great offense beats great defense. And it happens routinely. Now, yes, do you want to have a great defense? Obviously, that's going to make things easier. And it's not just about winning the Super Bowl. You're not going to play the Chiefs every week. You need to have a great defense in order to get to the game. Well, you don't need to have a great defense. You need to have some semblance of a defense. But at the end of the day, if one of the best defenses in the league isn't going to be able to stop Patrick Mahomes, then sometimes the best defense is a great offense. And so personally, my biggest takeaway coming out of that Super Bowl was the play of the two offensive lines, which are two of the best offensive lines in the league. And my thinking is, we've got talent on defense. And I'm not saying you completely ignore the defensive side of the football. Find a piece here, find a piece there. You can manipulate salaries. I think we have enough money where we could probably make a decent signing or two on the defensive side of the ball and not really have that take away from what we spend on the offensive side of the ball. But if you really want this offense or this team to take the next step, then what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to have an elite offense. And you can only have an elite offense by having one of two things. And if you have both things, then you're truly, truly elite, and you end up being the Kansas City Chiefs. And that is a great quarterback and a great offensive line. The jury is still very much out on whether or not the Dolphins have a great quarterback. I don't think there's anybody right now that will say that the Dolphins have an elite quarterback. And certainly nobody's going to say that the Dolphins have even a great offensive line. I think at best their offensive line is mediocre. So I think for me, I go all in on the offense. And I say, take the pieces that you have on defense, make a couple of value signings. The biggest addition that we make on the defensive side of the ball this offseason, we already made in Vic Fangio. But let's go into next season with the offensive line being rock solid, There, we know what we've got. We're really happy about it. And honestly, as much as I'm not a proponent for spending a bunch of money on a running back, but if there happens to be a running back that's out there on the open market and it's like Saquon Barkley, now I think Saquon Barkley is probably going to get franchise, and you probably have to trade him and sign him, which I'm not going to do. But if for some reason you have a guy like that out there on the open market, you fix the offensive line and you bring in Saquon Barkley, I don't care who your quarterback is, your offense is going to be impossible to stop. So I wouldn't hate it.
Do you think the Dolphins are bringing in Saquon Barkley?
No, I don't think they're bringing in Saquon Barkley.
What do you think about?
Honestly, I probably would just spend a bunch of money on a guard and a tackle.
Yeah.
And I would say, all right, look, if Austin Jackson and Liam Eichenberg, outplay these guys, then it's a good problem to have. But I'm not going into next season relying on either of those guys to be a starter on this offensive line. Because I need my offense to be outstanding next year. And
there is a guard that is a free agent that the Dolphins could sign. He's a veteran. He's been around the league. He's a little bit of a workhorse, but he's available for the Dolphins to bring in if they wanted him.
If you say Jesse Davis, I'm going to scream.
Okay, then I'm just going to go ahead and not say anything.
What did I miss that I come back to Jesse Davis talk?
The brain so Kadeem disappeared. For those of you listening in podcast form, Kadeem disappeared for a moment, and the brain was talking about wanting to bring in, he transitioned to saying basically that the Dolphins, should get value pieces on defense, but primarily look at investing on the offensive side of the ball, go all in on offense, build up the offensive line, and try to find a running back out there at some point. But the real focus is, let's build up that offensive line. Let's find another guard. Let's find another tackle and really solidify this offensive line so that you can have an unstoppable offense. And I was just saying that Jesse Davis is a free agent. So, we could bring him in if we wanted to. But what do you think, Brain? You're talking about running backs. You mentioned Saquon. That's not going to happen in all likelihood.
No.
But you spending money on Josh Jacobs?
No, probably not.
You spending money on, what about Jerick McKinnon?
Well, the truth is that, and I feel this way about just about every position, is that you spend money on the elite guys, and if they're not elite, then you just try to get value. So I'm not going to overspend, certainly at running back. I'm not going to overspend on a middle. I think Josh Jacobs is a really good running back, but I'm not going to pay what it's going to cost to bring in Josh Jacobs at the cost of what you could otherwise get. When I look at the Super Bowl and you see the Eagles and the Chiefs doing it with Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco, and the Eagles are doing it with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell. So I actually think I would have no problem with coming back with Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson.
Yeah.
I have no problem. Those guys were productive. Maybe they weren't super consistent, but the main thing is build up your offensive line, get a tight end that can block so you can actually run the scheme that Josh McDaniel or that Mike McDaniel. I'm never going to stop doing that. That Mike McDaniel wants to run. And I think you'll get fine production from the offense. And then, you can always find. Now, I'll say this, a guy like Rashad Penny. If Rashad Penny is somebody that you can get for like a 1 year, 4 or 5, maybe even $6 million contract,
and
that's a contract that's not going to kill you. And it has the upside of this guy could actually be an elite running back and solve that issue. But I'm not going out there and breaking the bank on Josh Jacobs, and I'm not going to overspend on, a Jerick McKinnon or somebody in that vein when you could just as well just bring back Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. and use that money elsewhere, like your offensive line, which is actually what matters.
The Dolphins could sign Rashad Penny for a bag of Doritos, and you'd still have people in the Dolphins fan base freaking out about the fact that they brought in a running back who just cannot stay healthy when they've already got a quarterback who, quote unquote, cannot stay healthy.
It's fair.
So I'm just saying, I love the ceiling on Penny, but that's why I think you're going to be able to get him on a probably a lot lower than $6 million per year on a 1 year prove it kind of deal, because he's going to be a value because of the fact that he can't stay healthy, and clearly the Seahawks don't have any need for him anymore.
Well, if he gets down to like the Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson level,
let's go.
As far as salary, then sign me up.
Let's go.
And I give him the the Chase Edmonds deal that you just gave.
Don't even give him that much. Don't even need to give him that much.
2 years, but only the first year is guaranteed, so it's essentially a 1 year deal. And if he gets hurt or he just doesn't produce, you cut bait with him.
I think it's so. Before my internet, like, don't know why it cut out, is what it is. But yeah, Evan, you mentioned, and I was going to bring up, you had a tweet about it used to be defense win championships, but that's no longer the case. And if the Dolphins are going to win a Super Bowl, they're going to need essentially a high-powered offense with Tua at the helm. To keep Tua at the helm, you need to keep him healthy. And we could talk about, him taking judo lessons to learn how to fall and all that kind of stuff. But essentially, in my opinion, the Dolphins need an offensive line, which the Eagles had, which essentially gives you, it doesn't matter who's behind, who's running the ball, but, they don't get touched until they get to the second level. And I think it's one thing which Dolphins fans thought they were going to get with Mike McDaniel, because he was this, one game guru, and he's going to bring that one game from San Francisco to Miami, and we didn't quite get that. Maybe you see in the second year with a new offensive line coach, better, addition to the offensive line and all that kind of stuff. Maybe this one game we was going to get last year, we get this year. But you mentioned a tight end. It's probably very, very, very unlikely Mike Gesicki returns. If he does, it will be because he can't get deal elsewhere, and I can't see that happening. Do you think tight end is something we should address in free agency, in the draft, or is the tight end for 2023 already in the building? And I will ask you, Aaron, first.
Historically, tight ends do not come in NFL ready. They usually take at least a year. The guy from, Oregon State, Musgrave, projected to be a second-round guy. He might be there for the Dolphins. He might be somebody that the Dolphins maybe have to trade up for. That's an interesting option. But if you go and especially if you trade up for him, if you trade up for a tight end, when tight ends historically have struggled coming out of the gate, and this guy pulls a Hunter Long and we don't see him for the first year, it's going to be a disaster. So I think even if that's the route you go, you absolutely have to bring in somebody in free agency that can block as a tight end. You're not going to find, a George Kittle. That's not going to happen this season. I mean, Musgrave is kind of the idea there that, he could be that kind of player. But how much do you want to pay up to move up to get him with the uncertainty that he's going to be that? Because there's no certainty that he's going to be that. What this team needs, though, is they need a tight end that can block. We've seen nothing I think Durham Smythe is serviceable, but he's not great. Hunter Long, we have not seen with any consistency that he can play tight end at this level. I know Hunter Long is going to be on the roster. I think Durham Smythe, you need to have an upgrade over. You could easily get rid of Durham Smythe's contract. He's a very easy cap casualty, but you got to bring in somebody that's better than him, at least at blocking. You don't need a tight end to swallow up a bunch of targets. We saw that's the whole reason why the decision to franchise Mike Gesicki was a disaster, because your targets are going to go to Jalen Waddle and to Tyreek Hill, as they should, because the offense is built around run after the catch, and it's built on getting the ball to those wide receivers. And aside from those, you could still work in an Eric Ezukanma. If you decide to keep Trent Sherfield, he's going to get targeted. You don't need to get passing game production out of the tight end in this offense. Sure, if you get a tight end that can do everything, obviously that'd be amazing, but you don't really need to pay up to get it. Just make sure that you get a tight end that can block. And I think the easiest way to do it, and I don't think you need to pay a ton to do it, because in the NFL, the tight ends that are getting paid big money are the tight ends that put up a bunch of passing game production. They put up a bunch of receiving yards. They put up a bunch of receiving touchdowns. I think you can find value in a blocking tight end for like $1 million, $2 million, $3 million and get a major upgrade over a Durham Smythe.
Josh, is tight end in free agency the way to go?
Well, I mean, I think you probably want to bring in somebody, but I think, because otherwise you're riding with Durham Smythe and Hunter Long, and Hunter Long is such an unknown quantity. I think it is worth going out there in free agency and bringing in a tight end, but I don't know that you're going to spend a lot of money at tight end. You're going to go out there and you're going to look at your Dalton Schultzes, and you're going to look at your Robert Tunyons, and you're going to look at your, Hayden Hursts, and, those guys that are out there, and you may find somebody that is going to be good to bring in. You're going to get him for reasonably cheap. And that's going to be what you need to do. Because otherwise you're just running with Durham Smythe. And again, like we said, Hunter Long is such an unknown quantity at this point, and which is, that it is what it is. It's hard to say, but it feels like that is heading in the direction of being another big miss for Chris Greer. Don't let Charlie hear me say that, but that just seems like where that's going right now. So I think you do want to bring somebody in, because you don't want to just roll with those two guys as your tight ends. And like Aaron said, you draft the tight end, it's the Pat Fryermuths of the world are few and far between that they're going to come in and immediately be effective NFL players. Like, it's going to take those guys a little while to catch up to the system. So, and the physicality of the game at the pro level. So I think the best option is to find, a value tight end on the market. There are going to be a lot of them out there. There's, and I'm not necessarily, the name that everybody's been bouncing around, and I've mentioned it a few times, is Dalton Schultz as the guy that comes in. He's probably going to be on the higher end of the tight end market, but a guy like Tunyon, you might be able to get at a much better kind of bargain price. And that's where I think what the Dolphins should be looking to do at that position. I don't think you want to be going out there. I mean, if you're going out splashing big money on a tight end, Mike Gesicki may end up being the tight end that goes for the highest dollar value on the market. But again, that's because you've got teams that are going to use him for his receiving prowess as opposed to his blocking prowess, which is, well, none.
Yeah. Before we head into bonus time, one last, I guess it's a free agency question, and it's kind of back to defense. There's been a lot of people who talk about Vic Fangio's defense and the importance of linebackers. Now, obviously, the Dolphins have Jerome Baker under contract, drafted Channing Tindall last season, and we barely saw Channing Tindall. And then you got your Duke Rileys and others. And obviously, none of us, exactly know what Vic Fangio will do with the linebackers and stuff like that. But is linebackers something the Dolphins need to address in free agency? And do you think, I don't know, it's probably a bit too early to ask this, but do you think Jerome Baker could be a cap casualty as they try and get back some cap and kind of move the Dolphins linebacker room in another direction? Josh, what do you think?
Oh, I mean, I think that's absolutely a possibility. I think I mean, honestly, I look at that linebacker room and I don't know that I see a whole lot of guys that are safe in that linebacker room. I think there's a lot of guys, there's a lot of potential for things to be moved around there. I think linebacker is another area where the Dolphins may look at actually doing a big spend in free agency to bring somebody in. So yeah, I mean, I don't think, you know, whether it's Baker, whether it's oh God, I don't know why his name is escaping me right now, but the guy he's really good at running in a straight line and hitting people really hard. Brain, what's his name?
Landon
Landon
Roberts.
Roberts.
Landon Roberts. Jesus. I don't know why I just mine went completely blank there. But yeah, I mean, these are both guys that could, easily be gone. I think, like I said, that is a room where I think there's nobody's safe there. I mean, Duke Riley, I think, is a nice piece, but he's not safe. Andrew Van Ginkel, I think, is a nice piece. I don't know that he's necessarily safe. I think that we could see a big turnover in the linebacker room, especially given how important that position is going to be moving forward, particularly in pass coverage for this defense.
Yeah, and Aaron, I guess same question to you, but also it's probably 99.9% that Byron Jones is no longer a Miami Dolphin. Is it post June 1st when his contract is no longer an absolute nightmare? Again, do the Dolphins try and find a corner in free agency, or do they kind of roll with Xavier Howard, Kadeko, who hope Trill Williams returns from injury and has that season we thought we might have, given what we heard about him in training camp? What did the Dolphins do at corner? Because I think that's another room, like the linebacker room, which kind of has people going, is the long-term answer here already? Because there's quite a few gaps at those two positions.
So this will be interesting. I think this is going to be a Vic Fangio decision. It's going to be a Vic Fangio and a Chris Greer decision, because they'll look at the numbers. Nothing's going to happen pre-June 1st. So you're going to have Byron Jones on the roster when you're in the heat of free agency. And so it gives the Dolphins a chance to kind of, weigh out the room, kind of let's see what happens here. Let's see if we can get somebody at a good value. I don't think the Dolphins are going to be in the market to spend a ton of money at cornerback, because we've seen that. And frankly, if you're not going to be playing a ton of man coverage, I don't think you need to do that. So I think they'll be in the market to bring in an upgrade over Nick Needham. And then depending on who they end up with, if they end up getting a Patrick Peterson, for example, then I think you can live with getting rid of Byron Jones, and you can also use the roughly $9 million that you'd be saving by cutting him after June 1st, that you can use elsewhere on the roster. But I don't think the Dolphins need to be desperate at that position. And frankly, I would like to see the new coaching staff come in right away, and one of the first things they do is go and talk to Byron Jones and see where his head's at. Because if Byron Jones wants to play here and Byron Jones is healthy, then you're not going to find very many guys that are better than Byron Jones, especially if what you're saving is $9 million. Now, granted, you got to pay him what he's scheduled to make this season, which is going to be $13 million or whatever. But then, you can get rid of him, next year, or you could get rid of him, with the void years after that, for almost nothing. If he's happy and he's healthy and he can play, Byron Jones might be your best option. But if that relationship is severed to the point where it can't be fixed, well, then that you're going to cut him. And so that makes things a lot easier for you planning what do we need to do, because then you do need to bring in somebody, because and then maybe what you do is you spend what is it, $6-7 million on a Patrick Peterson to come in on a 1 or 2 year deal to replace Byron Jones. And then maybe you bring Nick Needham back at like the $3 million. And that's how you spend your $9 million of savings from cutting Byron Jones, is that now you've spent it on Patrick Peterson and on bringing back Nick Needham, and you still have Kader Kohou here. And that is a really, really good top 4. And that's not even talking about Trill Williams, if Trill Williams comes back and is healthy and plays at a high level, and whoever else the Dolphins might draft. So I think the first thing, if I was Vic Fangio, the first thing that I would do is I want to talk to Byron Jones and I want to see where his head's at. Because if Byron Jones is ready to play and his issue was just with the coaching staff, well, you cleaned house on the defensive side of the ball. You let Vic Fangio bring in his guys. And if Byron Jones is ready to go, then I'm fine with it.
I think it's one of those things where, the corners, I'm shocked that no one mentioned Noah Igbenogany. Like, Noah Igbenogany is someone who, we all thought this was going to be the year. You bring back, or you have, the coaches we had in Sam Madison, and it's like, if Noah can't learn from these guys, then there's no hope for Noah. And it's like, to give the kid credit, he had the interception against the Steelers, which won the game. Again, maybe this new system is something which really, really helps him. He's not on an island 24/7 with no help over the top. I've seen some people say with his speed and I guess range, you move into safety. I think his ball skills and his ability to turn on, like, locate the ball, it could be something. If you keep everything in front of him, you don't get those issues. But listen, if we're talking about Noah Igbenogany being a savior in 2023, the Dolphins have major issues. I guess the Dolphins are unfortunate that they don't have that first round pick, not the one that they traded for Bradley Chubb, but the one that they lost for trying to get Sean Payton and Tom Brady, or whatever the league said you tampered with and all that kind of stuff. Because right now you look at that first round pick and you go offensive line, corner, like it gives you so many different options to mess around with. And for a team that has aspirations of reaching the Super Bowl, and so they should, I do feel like there still are quite a few holes. The depth isn't where it was a few seasons ago. You look at the offensive line, and again, you're once again, the season started tomorrow going, hey, Liam Eichenberg and, Austin Jackson, we need you to make that leap, which we wanted last year, and we need you to stay healthy. You're looking at the running backs going, hey, can we get a run game going this year, which isn't their fault, but there's no run game. Looking at the tight ends going, hey, Hunter Long, do you still love football? Do you want to do this? Could that be really helpful if you did, given that we drafted you quite early? And then you go to the defensive side of the ball and you're relying on Emmanuel Ogba to get healthy and have a season in which, he got paid for. You're asking, or you're finding out if Byron Jones wants to go another year. I'm sure at some point we're going to hear what that injury was, which kept him out for an entire season when it looked like we were getting back in week 1. That's just, I likened it to the Will Fuller situation. Charlie disagreed with me. I think they are I think the exact same scenario. Hey, we'll be back next week. He'll be back next week. We're shutting him down for the season. It's like, well, hold on. What actually happened there? There's so many answers, there's so many questions, and we'll get answers over the next few weeks. Before we delve into bonus time, Aaron, Josh told us last time, but Aaron, this time, tell us where we can find you guys: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, MySpace, Bebo, wherever you guys are. Let us know where we can find you.
Obviously, you can find the show on Twitter at Same Old Dolphins. You can find the Same Old Dolphin Show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever. And also on dolphinstalk.com, where we're featured in their daily podcast network. So you can find all of our shows there. You can also find me on Twitter at Aaron the Brain. Of course, if you're going to follow me, and it's not in Dolphin season, you're mostly going to find a lot of tweets about the Bravo Real Housewives and RuPaul's Drag Race. So it might not be your cup of tea, but if it is your cup of tea, then you will absolutely love it. And I welcome you. I welcome you to the party. But during football season, it will be, there will be a lot of Dolphins tweets, especially during game days.
I can't even tell you what the outro is. Again, it's something which I know Charlie does, but I kind of just do the, thumb, little finger thing, and Charlie talks and stuff like that. Before we do delve into bonus time, guys, thanks for listening. If you haven't already subscribe to Go Time Dolphins, subscribe to Same Old Dolphins, turn on notifications as we're going live in just a few weeks. We've got more announcements to make over the next few episodes. So many things happening over here at Go Time Dolphins. But for myself, Kadeem Simmons, for Josh Kasker and Aaron the Brain, or Aaron Kasker from Same Old Dolphins, thank you for tuning in this time. Make sure you tune in next time on Go Time. And I can't say already because I'm from London.
Already.
Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's showtime. Going all out when it's go time. I ain't wasting no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's showtime. Cause it's your time. Lay it on the line when it's go time. Don't waste no time. Gotta make them lose their mind when it's your time. And it's showtime. Going all out when it's go time.
Stay positive, test negative.
Oh, my days, there is always something. I'm telling you now, and Aaron, like you said, I am sure that when Charlie, when Josh are doing the outro, like we're listening, but we're also like just on auto tune. It's like, okay, for me, wait to hear one word, and then I do my thing, and then it's Charlie. We can't keep doing this. We need to we're a unit. We're together.
You know what time it is. Stay positive, test negative.
I think, again, when I was away meeting Tom Holland and Zendaya, Sheraz D filled in for me, done amazingly. Clearly, Josh is filling in for Charlie. So I'm just going to back away. Let you two guys finish the show. So I'll give you a topic. No, it's I thought it was best to talk in overtime, bonus time. Oh my days, overtime. This is embarrassing at this point. Even though we discussed
it's like 3 o'clock in the morning where you're at. Come on.
It's 2. I'll probably be up to about 3, 4. But you mentioned 54 in our chat, about getting all together, doing the Same Old Dolphin, Go Time Dolphins collab. We mentioned it already, but I feel like it's been so long overdue that we need to spend as much time as possible talking about Zach Thomas finally reaching the Hall of Fame, because how he didn't get there as a first ballot Hall of Famer made 0 sense. I am not just young enough, but my Dolphins fandom. I miss Zach Thomas playing an elite level throughout his entire career. Aaron, tell me about Zach Thomas, the kind of linebacker he was, the man he was, and why he was so deserving to get his gold jacket.
So Zach Thomas is my favorite Dolphin of all time. Because not only was, in my opinion, he the heart and soul of those late 90s, early 2000s Dolphin defenses. And I know Jason Taylor was first ballot Hall of Famer, and you had those years with Pat Surtain and Sam Madison. And before Pat Surtain, you had Terrell Buckley there. And, a lot of attention got put on the corners. But at the heart and soul of all those defenses was Zach Thomas. And he was such a disruptive player and just making plays at the linebacker position and doing it as an undersized player. I mean, when you watch the Super Bowl and you saw when they did, they had them all line up at the goal line. Did you see Zach Thomas, how small he looked next to those guys? And he was a dominant linebacker. Like, I love that. Zach Thomas, more so than any player I think that I've ever seen, got the absolute most out of his body and his physical ability. And I think more so than anything else, that's why he's there. Well, that's not true. He got there because of his mental aptitude. Because obviously, if he was just relying on just his physical ability at that stature, it wouldn't have happened. So he had to be a step ahead of the opposing offenses. He had to know, based on the smallest things that he saw in his film study, how to anticipate what the offense was going to do so that he can get there a step quicker, so he can beat the blockers, because at the end of the day, he didn't have the size to beat blockers physically. I actually think it was quite fitting that he got in the way that he got in, because it's kind of how his whole career went. Because everybody in Zach Thomas's era, everybody knew that Zach Thomas was a really great linebacker. The problem is that at no point in his career did anybody believe that Zach Thomas was the best linebacker in the league, because at the beginning of his career, he was overshadowed by Ray Lewis and Junior Seau. And then later in his career, he was overshadowed by Brian Urlacher. And even though a lot of Dolphin fans have made this point that, Zach Thomas, I think he's more all pros than Brian Urlacher. And a lot of people will say that he's a better player. Brian Urlacher was a different sort of imposing force. And then also, how the NFL Hall of Fame goes. They really value Super Bowl appearances. So Brian Urlacher made it to that one Super Bowl on a team that was, quarterbacked by Rex Grossman. So obviously, Brian Urlacher carried that defense to the Super Bowl. That's his legacy. Whereas Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor and Sam Madison and Pat Surtain, as good as those players were, they never got to even an AFC championship game. And that's why, Zach Thomas was overshadowed for a lot of his career because of those guys. And that's why it took him a little bit to get in, because especially when, he was going up against Brian Urlacher to get into the Hall of Fame. But you get into this year where there's no other linebacker, and then all of a sudden you're looking at Zach Thomas and you're like, well, this is the guy. This is the year. I knew he was going to get in, and I couldn't be happier, because that's my favorite player of all time.
Josh, the Dolphins could do, or I don't know, could they? Can you find another Zach Thomas? Like, just how unique was he? Because, like Aaron mentioned, his size was just like, how are you playing NFL linebacker and you're this side, like a little pocket size linebacker?
Yeah, I mean, that just speaks to like what an incredible player he was. I mean, and like to be that, sort of, regular sized person in the land of giants, is a really difficult thing to do. And as Aaron said, it speaks to what made him great was his ability to read the game and understand the game, and to be able to be in the right place at the right time, because it wasn't about necessarily overpowering, although sometimes he showed a remarkable ability to do that too, in spite of his small stature. But it was that ability to, to read the game and understand it at that level that is he's like operating on a different plane than a lot of the guys around him. And that was one of the things that was so incredible about watching him. And then like, you hear all the time about effort and heart and grit and all of that. And, Zach Thomas was the player that embodied all of those things. And so, there's no more deserving guy out there than Zach Thomas. He absolutely deserves to be in. It was really exciting. I hate watching the NFL Honors Show. I think it's just a waste of 2 hours to sit and watch it. But this year I actually sat down and I watched it. I stayed up and I put it on. It started late, East Coast, 9:00 is the late, start time on the East Coast. But I said I'm going to stay up and I'm going to watch
2
this
in the
because
morning.
I think it's going to happen. And then it did. And as soon as they showed Jimmy Johnson on that stage, I was loving it because I knew that meant that Zach Thomas was finally getting in. And boy, and let me say this, if you have not yet seen the video of Zach Thomas coming home and finding Jimmy Johnson and his whole family in the house to tell him that he made the Hall of Fame, you need to seek it out because it is awesome. It is absolutely awesome. And you can Zach Thomas, he did a great job paying lip service all these years to saying, it's okay. I understand. I love the Dolphin fans and I appreciate their support. You saw in that clip just how much getting into the Hall means to that guy. And that video is unbelievable. And I am super stoked. I mean, I'm not going to be able to go down to Canton for the induction, but my heart will be there with everybody who is to see 54 go into the Hall. And it is an honor that he absolutely deserves.
You mentioned, Dolphins fans, and every single year, Dolphin fans were like, listen, Zach Thomas needs to be in the Hall of Fame. Who, very quickly, I guess one player each, who do you think is the next Dolphins player? I'm not going to ask you who you think Dolphins fans will get behind. Who do you think is a Dolphin who isn't in the Hall of Fame, is eligible for the Hall of Fame, and should be at least nominated for the Hall of Fame in 2023? Starting with you, Aaron.
That's going to be eligible for the Hall of Fame and should make it?
Well, not so much, someone who retired like 5-6 years ago, but any Dolphins fans, so any Dolphins players who's like, why isn't this guy in the Hall of Fame? Because I know Richmond Webb is someone who every single year Dolphin fans are like, why isn't Richmond Webb in the Hall of Fame? It makes no sense. And I see a lot of fans saying, now Zach Thomas is in, let's get behind Richmond Webb, because he deserves a place in the Hall of Fame.
I think Ricky Williams has probably the strongest case. And after him, I think Cameron Wake. But honestly, and I'd love to see Ricky get in. I don't know that he's going to. I don't think Cameron Wake's going to get in either. I think the next Dolphin to get into the Hall of Fame is somebody that's either on the roster right now or, maybe he isn't even on the roster yet. Obviously, Tyreek Hill right now is on a trajectory where he looks like he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, how many years does Tyreek Hill play with the Miami Dolphins? And when he gets, because if he plays 5-6 years with the Dolphins at the level that he played this year, then you can make the case that he goes in as a Dolphin. But if he only plays at that level for like 2-3 years, even though he gets into the Hall of Fame, does he go in as does it work like that in the NFL? Because I know in like baseball, like you go in as a member of one team, and like it would if he only plays at this level for like 2 or 3 years, then he probably goes in as a Chief, especially if he doesn't win a Super Bowl. Now, if he wins a Super Bowl or 2 with the Dolphins, then I think that cinches it. But honestly, outside of him, I can't think of another guy that is like a no-brainer, like they deserve to get in.
I mean, it's Richmond Webb. Richmond Webb is that guy. He's that guy. I mean, at this point, but it's hard, for an offensive lineman, even an offensive lineman that was as dominant as he was, it's hard to get that momentum at this point to get him into the Hall, especially when you consider like the kinds of names that are now retiring every year and that are now becoming eligible every year. It's going to be harder and harder for a guy like Richmond Webb to get in at this point. So, I mean, does he deserve to be there? In my eyes, yes. But like Aaron said, I think at this point, likelihood, it seems like the next Miami Dolphin that's going to go into the Hall of Fame is a guy who's still active right now, and we don't know who that is yet.
I just took a very quick look at an article on Bleacher Report of with the Miami Dolphin players who are not in the Hall of Fame. And 3 names stuck out to me, 2 in particular. The first was Mercury Morris. I don't believe he's in the Hall of Fame. They made a case for him. But the other 2 were the marks, Clayton and Duper. Do you reckon either of those could have a chance next year? Like you said, Josh, with every passing year, the amount of players who have retired in the last few years, it's like, well, they're, clear, first ballot Hall of Famers. And obviously projecting, 5-6 years down the line, you've got the likes of Brady, Watt, and all that kind of stuff. So do you reckon now is the time, Josh, that if a Richmond Webb, Mark Clayton, anyone like that is to get in the Hall of Fame, it will be in the next 2 to 3 years?
I mean, it's like you can make arguments for Clayton and Duper, and deserved. I think you could make a good argument for them because they were among the best receivers that ever played for the Miami Dolphins. But the bar for a wide receiver to get into the Hall of Fame is so high. It's so high when you look at, the kind, like, you've got to be like the elite of the elite of the elite of like all time and be able to do it for a really long time. And like, really, that's, I think, if there's something that's working against Clayton and Duper, is that when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, they're like big productive years were kind of, they were relatively short, I think, careers in the grand scheme of things. And like, you want to talk about a short career. What was it? Megatron? Did Megatron get into the Hall of Fame? Is he in the Hall of Fame now?
I will double check.
But he had that, he had a very short career because he walked away early. But I mean, he was like on another level than everybody else.
The thing with Clayton is I think he only had like 5,000-yard receiving years. I think he was a Pro Bowler 5 times. And the big thing with Clayton is that he caught a lot of touchdowns. And I think he caught a lot of touchdowns because of the nature of the offense and Dan Marino. And we didn't really have a running game. So the Dolphins were one of the few teams in that era that was throwing the ball to get into the end zone. And it's not to take anything away from Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, but, like Josh said, the bar is so high as far as receivers now, because now when since the game has changed over the last 20 years, the receiving stats are so inflated. So every year you go into it and you look at the guys that are available or that are eligible at wide receiver, and you like compare them to Andre Johnson. The numbers don't match up. I mean, it's like night and day. And like you look at Mark Clayton's numbers today, and if you were to like who is a receiver that is consistently like around like, I don't know, 1,000 to 1,200 yards receiving, that's like a number 2 receiver in today's NFL. That's not like an elite wide receiver. So and I think when you look at guys like Clayton and Richmond Webb, it's been so long now. So the people that are voting, they're not gonna, those guys are not getting in on numbers. So you have to get in on moments. And this is the whole issue with anybody that's been on the Miami Dolphins since, the Dan Marino era, is they never won anything. So they don't have those moments because the NFL Hall of Fame is so much about those moments. Like, Lynn Swann and John Stallworth get in for the Steelers, not because they had great numbers, but because they made big plays in multiple Super Bowls. That's not going to happen for a Mark Clayton. And, there's nothing that he can do at this point because he's been retired for like 30 years.
Yeah.
Very quickly, Calvin Johnson made the Hall of Fame in 2021. So
right.
Megatron is in the Hall of Fame. But guys, once again, like, share, and subscribe to Not Just Go Time Dolphins, Same Old Dolphins. Josh, Aaron, thank you so much for joining me, and we will catch you again soon.